Hello and welcome to the NewWorldReview, your source for everything anime and manga, and more specifically, welcome back to the Nencyclopedia, where today we will be making our first entry into the world of manipulation, featuring the poster boy of the art form, one Illumi Zoldyck. And look, when it comes to Nen, Illumi Zoldyck is one of the finest users that we have or ever will see in Hunter x Hunter, and I want to emphasize that right at the beginning because this isn't always apparent to more casual readers or watchers. Going through Hunter x Hunter the first time around, Illumi can seem like a very simple man with straightforward abilities, but the way I would personally describe him is a complex figure shrouded by simplicity. There is so much more going on under this vacant stare here that extends to his use of Nen as well. And furthermore, it also extends to subscribing to the NewWorldReview for regular Hunter x Hunter content uploaded straight into your YouTube feed, and there is your first revelation right there. I bet that you didn't know Illumi was a subscriber. Now kindly allow him to manipulate you into pressing that wonderful red button as well. Don't resist, as you'll discover shortly that probably won't end well for you. Before stepping into Illumi's trademark abilities though, he is not to be glossed over in terms of the basics of Nen. I think it is very important to highlight that in terms of sheer aura reserves, Illumi has never even come close to demonstrating his limit to us, which is very impressive given one particular ability. And as much as it's difficult to judge, he is quite consistently portrayed as something of an equal to Hisoka. Illumi and Hisoka are kind of aberrations of Hunter x Hunter, because it's very difficult to know how to rank either of them against other legendary Nen users. However, they do seem to be on more or less the same plane. There is nothing Illumi can do that will really surprise Hisoka and vice versa. With that said, Illumi is different in one key aspect, which is the basic principle of Ren. Where Hisoka is a more playful personality, Illumi is deadly serious. And as so, when he activates Ren, it has a particular illusory effect, and in the series there have even been instances when using Ren has led to the impression of facial distortion, like something straight out of a horror movie, because F this. In addition to this, Illumi's unbridled Ren is so powerful that it can be felt at a distance of several hundred meters away, which is, well, there's some pretty potent bloodlust on display there, and such raw output would make the Zoldyck family proud, and is actually very evocative of his grandfather's claim of being able to project an N up to a radius of 300 meters. And just as I mentioned in Killua's video, I should also state that Illumi is a perfect candidate for Nen use, having been thoroughly and brutally trained in the art of assassination since birth. In terms of physicality, he has absolutely no barriers to Nen and is thus free to explore the full potential of his affinity, which, speaking of, Illumi is a black-haired Zoldyck child, and as is the trend, he was graced with the natural affinity of manipulation. It's a fairly unfortunate area to land in because it happens to be right next to specialization on the Nen ring, meaning that Illumi only has one strong natural ally in emission. However, even that is arguably more than he needs because all of his abilities in the series are attributed as pure manipulation, although I highly doubt that this is the case, and we'll get into why soon. But to begin this examination in a proper fashion, we're going to start with Illumi's most well-known ability, which is corpse control. And here we have an example of manipulation 101. Illumi basically looking for a way to make other vessels do his bidding, and he achieves this by piercing the head of any given corpse with a variety of needles, and uses Nen imbued within said needles to issue commands. But this is where I immediately need to stop and question the idea of, pure manipulation. I am fairly convinced that Illumi needs to invoke emission in order to make anything to do with these needles work, because the logic is that Illumi imbues the needles with his own aura, which in order to achieve he would need to separate the aura from his body via emission, and it's super basic emission, but still it's there. And I guess I will say that this is a long shot of thought, but there is also the potential that Illumi wields conjuration, because it is a friendly enough affinity for him, and it may very well explain how he possesses seemingly infinite needles. He just keeps conjuring them into existence as needed. And from there, I guess the idea would be that the conjured needles also contain the aura required to control a body once initiated. But if that wasn't bad enough, I have an even messier explanation, which is that he could conjure the needles, then emit his aura into the conjured needles, and then activate manipulation once the needles have penetrated the body in question. And I don't think that's too out of the realm of possibility for someone like Illumi, because he is a demonstrable master of Nen, and neither of the other two affinities would need to be activated at a particularly potent degree. But you can also go down another route, say that the needles are physical constructs created out of raw materials rather than aura, and maybe Illumi even dips into enhancement to make them stronger and easier to kill people. Which, speaking of, these needles are a stroke of genius when it comes to corpse control, because this particular ability can only be used on the dead. And it just so happens that in order to activate corpse control, Illumi essentially needs to kill his target first, with the very needles that then go on to control them, so it's quite a clever way to efficiently perform this ability, which also takes blatant advantage of Illumi's trained assassin skills. If anyone not trained in swift death via thin weaponry were to attempt to use a Hatsu like this, it would not work out anywhere near as well for them. Corpse control is quite versatile as well, because Illumi's new puppets are capable of performing fairly complex actions, and to the untrained eye, they can even pass for casual living people, meaning that yes, it is very good for infiltration and ambush style uses, all incredibly useful in the assassin profession. The one negative aspect of corpse control is that it has been implied that it does take Illumi some time to craft his puppets, and as such it's not so useful in an emergency style situation. Being the ever resourceful man he is though, Illumi does have a solution to this, which takes the form of an ability known as Needle People. Now there is a common misconception with Hunter x Hunter fans that this is more or less the same thing as corpse control. However, one of the big differences is that Needle People takes effect on the living, allowing Illumi to control people without killing and converting them. And very importantly, this can be achieved very quickly. Illumi just needs to stick a needle, that's right, just one, into the skull of a person and then bam, control. And at this stage you might be wondering, well, why even bother using corpse control then? It takes time, effort, and involves using many more needles than Needle People does. Well, that's because Needle People comes with a fair few disadvantages. One of which is that each individual needle needs to be imbued with a very substantial amount of aura in order to gain that instant control. And furthermore, once under Illumi's command, the Needle People become more or less zombies. They aren't capable of refined action, so it's much less subtle to say the least. Although Illumi can choose to insert more needles with more aura for more complex control, but at that point it would probably be more efficient just to use corpse control. Needle People really is an emergency situation type of Hatsu because it actively goes against the principles of assassination because it's not stealthy in any way, shape or form, and it just draws a lot of attention. Which makes sense because Needle People is very much a representation of Illumi's inner self, the one he very rarely shows, which is a wildly ambitious and surprisingly chaotic persona, driven to attain absolute power and potentially even world domination. So having a Hatsu structured to control giant segments of the population is very much in line with this desire. Oh, and by the way, this is yet another quality that speaks to Illumi's terrifying aura reserves. Making a needle person is not cheap. It requires a significant investment of aura, and the fact that Illumi can make seemingly hundreds at a time while still possessing enough aura to comfortably operate himself is just astonishing and quite possibly the single most powerful use of manipulation we've seen in Hunter x Hunter. Quite possibly, I don't know, there's a certain ant that might be able to trump that, but who cares? And Illumi certainly doesn't stop there because the key to being a great assassin is utility. They need to be able to operate in any given situation presented, and one other ability that aids Illumi in this regard is body alteration. And this is kind of cool because Illumi can imbue his needles with aura, much like we've seen already, and then insert them into himself, at which point the aura within will then go on to manipulate his own body into a completely different physical structure. And yeah, I know this might sound like a really roundabout way of doing things, you know, emitting aura from your body just to like reinsert it into your body, but that's kind of just how Nen is. In fact, manipulation as an affinity is full of all sorts of crazy subtypings, which means that users more often than not need to operate in certain conditions. Also meaning that they rarely have a straightforward path of just deciding something like, oh, let's transform my body, go. Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. In general, they would need to do it in a more roundabout way, and discovering a solution under those conditions would probably lead to their benefit, making the ability either more powerful or cost less aura or something else. With that said, to go against everything I just said, Illumi is such a manipulation boss that he can change his appearance without the use of the needles, but this results in a limited disguise that he can only use for about 4 to 5 hours before reverting back. It also likely costs him a hell of a lot more aura to invoke due to not having as many conditions placed on activation. But Illumi also has one other important Hatsu, which would of course be Hypnotic Spell, also known as retrospectively one of, if not the first visualized depiction of Nen in the series when he activated it against Killua in the Hunter exam. Although to be fair, the groundwork for this ability had been laid long before that point. Hypnotic Spell operates quite similarly to Needle People in principle, being that Illumi needs to pierce the brain of a target with a needle. However, from this point he not only allows them to live but also maintain their functions, but he does apply a series of preset commands or conditions. And there isn't a whole lot of use for this, with the exception of being able to manipulate the actions of those who Illumi cares about and does not want to kill, i.e. Killua. And in the series, Illumi more or less programmed Killua to feel an overwhelming sense of fear every time he disobeyed a preset order, one of which would be finding himself in a situation where he is unsure of victory, because an assassin must always be 100% certain in their success. It's also very subtle and sinister because it's designed to make their target feel like these are their real emotions, and willpower itself is not enough to overcome any feeling generated by Hypnotic Spell. The only way around it is to recognize the needle and then remove it, which Killua eventually did and thus broke free from the spell. But this is also a mark of utility because Hypnotic Spell is the only needle technique that Illumi has shown thus far that does not result in the death or lifelong crippling of a target. I mean, other than the needles that he uses to control himself, of course. And actually, I would be really keen to find out if Illumi can use his needles to perform body alteration on anyone else. But back to an actual point, even in the case of Needle People where it's designed to take control of the living, the Hatsu is also designed to eventually kill them via over exhaustion. And in the rare case that the needle person does survive their ordeal, they will be crippled for the rest of their lives. So being controlled by Illumi is more often than not a death sentence, which is simply terrifying because of how easy it is for Illumi to meet those activation requirements. But in essence, Illumi is a masterclass of manipulation. There are a lot of Nen users in the series who splash manipulation to great effect, but there is no one who embodies the true potential of manipulation like Illumi Zoldyck. And in terms of pure manipulation, he makes almost every other natural manipulator look quite basic in comparison. Even someone like Shalnok, who is absurdly powerful in his own right, but Illumi is just that amazing that Shalnok looks like budget Illumi. So let us all now take a moment to bow before the undisputed king of manipulation. But what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, or even join my Discord server. And if you're keen for some more Hunt content, then please do go and check out some of my other videos, or even subscribe to the channel for regular Hunt glory delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.